Hello and welcome to another episode of the CollabTalk podcast, where we discuss the convergence of technology, business productivity, and collaboration culture. And my guest today is good friend Chris McNulty. I guess I should also throw onto the title here, former MVP, but marketing expert, consultant, chief marketing officer with Synergy Alliance and board member for AIM International. Still here, it's Chris.
That would be me. I am still here. And today here is just to the northeast of Seattle, right on, for folks who are familiar with Puget Sound, it's in a town called Bothell, which is about 8 miles north of the Microsoft campus. So great to be here with you today, Christian, and with your audience.
Yeah, oh, it's great to have you. And this is it's a great topic. And I know that you are, one of the experts on this. We're going to be talking about the business value of SharePoint Premium. And I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit more about your background, because you've been in this space. We've known each other for like 15, 16 years now. Right. I think I'm trying to remember when we first met. You were still working. I think you were working for a consulting company at the time, or were you working for a customer? I can't remember.
You and I first met at SharePoint Saturday Charlotte in April of 2010.
Right. What was I wearing though? Come on. That's a like. Why does my wife remember?
You were wearing a dark sport jacket, a plaid shirt, and jeans. Which is a fair bet for you, though.
Probably pretty close, but that's because I had my outfit that I would wear. But anyway, So I can't remember. Were you consulting at the time, or you still were you working with like an end user customer company?
I was. So when you and I first met, I was one of the principals and practice leads at a consultancy based just outside of Boston, mostly focused in the northeastern United States and looking at the opportunities to deliver value for our clients across the Microsoft ecosystem, which in late 2000s, early 2010s was predominantly an on-premises environment. Yep. And so between that and the writing and speaking, that led me to Quest Software as CTO and general manager of the Microsoft business. We were acquired by Dell, which was an interesting run, which led me to, that's when I was an MVP. And that all led me to Microsoft, where I've spent the better part of the last 10 years, senior director of product marketing for content platform solutions. That includes, heritage technologies like SharePoint and OneDrive, and some of the emergent technologies like Syntex/SharePoint Premium, Viva, Copilot, and the rest. So it's great to be here with you today.
I know that. So going back as part of that, there was I always had kind of a short list of those of us that were MVPs and community people that were really focused on governance and compliance and kind of all of those, the constraints around and the rules around and getting the most out of SharePoint and like that side of it. And those of us that were more business focused versus, keeping servers up and running. Not that you didn't do a lot of that stuff too, but on that side of it, I mean, you were part of that list. Sue Hanley was part of that list. It was a small, important group of people within the community.
It's a very important group of people, and not to say one of my most frequently sought topics then is not really in demand anymore, but it was disk optimization strategies to maximize SQL Server performance for a SharePoint environment.
Now that I would read that ebook or the full-length novella on that. So when you have time,
but you might fall asleep before you got to the end of the title. But I am not going to hold you to account on this one, Christian. I remember one of your most frequently sought sessions in those days actually still has relevance today, which is like the 10 most important things you need to know about metadata. I won't ask you what number 7 was today. I'll wait till I have you on my podcast for that.
Yeah.
But
there's it's funny. I'm doing similar stuff, that whole series. Mm-hmm. And when I stopped doing it, so it had the same title, like the SharePoint in general, I would say the 10 things that you need to know about SharePoint kind of topics, whatever. I had over 500,000, I think it was like 650,000 downloads of those slide decks back in the day. It's just insane number around that.
Oh, I would have.
But
yeah, my technical tips and tricks on how to patch an on-premises SharePoint environment and version numbers and what was in each thing. I have 80,000 people a month looking at that.
Yeah, those were the days.
Well, that's also an artifact. To be fair, Microsoft has been much more comprehensive and I think current in what they make available for both technical documentation and adoption documentation online. So there's just less of a need for the community to plug those gaps.
Well, and to be fair to the community too, when you go in and look at a lot of that content, there's a lot of it that is authored by community members that finds its way in there as the official documentation. And so they'll, I mean, there could be things, I mean, obviously new features coming out that are written by the product teams. But then very quickly, anything on the implementation and the adoption side, as you look through the list of authors, you'll often find some or all of it being written by members of the community.
Right. And I mean, that still holds true today. I was just this morning, Leon Armiston, who's a MVP based in the UK, he writes some of the best coverage, better than Microsoft's own, on SharePoint Premium and Syntax. For those of you in this audience who may not be as engaged across the community, there's always a role for you. Everyone has expertise to share. You can find what makes sense for you, but you can also find the answers in a more human-centric way than sometimes just running to Bing or Google for a search or Copilot. We're in 2025, of course.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's funny. I co-host a cohort of people that want to become MVPs. We just had our monthly call this morning, and one of the we kind of do it in AMA style, and one of the things that we always go through is, you know, like, what do I write about? What do I create content things around there? Because there's all this great content that's out there. It's like, you know, look, there are the definitive articles on, like, a new feature comes out, what does it do? How do you deploy it? Kind of all of those things. But I always try to encourage people, like, you have your voice, you have your experience, your audience, your style of writing or speaking that will attract people that will be bored to death by reading the official documentation around that. But you also can go into and share your perspectives from an industry perspective or a role-based perspective, things like that, that you won't find within that documentation. There's always opportunity. I always tell people, like, don't self-edit. Don't talk yourself out of writing something, creating something just because, hey, there's this other great article. Reference it, point to it. Like, hey, that's a resource. You should check this out. Here's my experience with this.
Right. And it's important to be honest, because that authenticity, I think, helps you connect with the audience. Not everything that Microsoft does connects with the customer base. There's a need to be able to have that feedback loop working both for Microsoft as well as across the community. And like, if you're in a particular industry, if you're in healthcare or regulated industry, or you're working kind of in open retail, there are other people who might be having a similar experience to yours. And just because something doesn't work right for you, it's okay to say, with this new let's pick a SharePoint Premium feature, such as the newly announced custom glossaries for automatic translation. Based on your industry and location, that either may be the thing that was holding you back from using it, or something that you just would never use. Yeah. And that learned experience, like, everyone has something to contribute. Yeah. And even more so, you know, the growth mindset, we all have so much to learn, and we do that best with each other.
Well, that's one of the reasons why, going back to, like, my old topic and what I do now, like, I love to do the productivity tips. I'll be in Vegas in May doing my top 20 productivity tips in an hour, which is, it's a lot to go through in an hour. It's pretty jam-packed. But doing those old sessions, doing these new sessions, and it always changes, like, whatever new things that are out there that's really cool is you might be listening to and you're like, okay, of the 10 features, like 6 of these I know really well. Yeah, but those 4, you've never heard of those things.
Right.
Like everybody gets some value. There's always something on the list that, every person finds one thing or more where they like had never heard of it, and it could change their lives.
There was something like when I was transitioning into this recording for my last meeting, I stopped and checked something on LinkedIn, and Michael McNulty, who's a longtime member of the community, Microsoft staff based in the Philadelphia area in the United States, he was just sharing his best practices for prompting Copilot to generate better meeting notes, because we all it's very easy that you see the prompt, generate meeting notes, and you get it. But his is much more specific about like, I want these things to be bold. I want spaces between that. I want a table of links. If you don't have that, don't give me a blank table. And that sort of samizdat or folksonomy, or choose your favorite academically pretentious word to describe that grassroots dissemination of information, it remains one of the things that's most vital, I think, in this technology space.
I'm doing that more and more. It's like really focusing on what do I want as a specifically from the output on that. So I get asked the question, I'm looking for ideas, or I'm looking for whatever that thing is. I don't know. I'm fishing out there, but I want it this way and this. Like that is incredible. It's one of the reasons why I'm also very excited about, the idea of agents and agents being able to identify, I can't do that, but I know this other agent that can do that, and to be able to trigger and call in others and do more and more complex, output based on multiple agents. Like moving towards that future is exciting.
It is. I think agents are fascinating. I do think there are an awful lot of agents that will be, the more it becomes mainstreamed, making it as easy as possible for you to have an agent on a piece of content in SharePoint, or to build a quick Copilot Studio agent. You're going to see a proliferation of those, but I think what's important there is to be mindful of the flight to quality and the flight to governance, because as people are getting their feet wet with agents, the fact that you can build an agent that tells you a lot of the same things that a search or Copilot would tell you about a given SharePoint library isn't as interesting as when you can start to take something and personalize it, and being able to say, I want this agent to be based on this source and that external source and these things. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can build an agent in 2 clicks or less doesn't mean that that agent is even going to be the most useful. It doesn't necessarily require 6 months to build a great agent, but to have a little bit of thought about what the end result should be, and to make sure as people encounter that agent, what should people get from that agent as they are running through what should be the most standard kinds of questions or interactions. Copilot and Studio and non-Microsoft agent technologies can get you so far, but being able to encapsulate that human experience and personalized expertise is what's going to distinguish one agent from another. And also, half the agents will be junk, to be honest.
Yes. Well, which is another reason why you need to have, just like we saw one of the most popular topics around, Power Platform, and organizations that are starting to go and build those types of automations is like, again, it's like you said, it's like, can you go and build this? Yes. Should you go and build this? Well, and then similar with any other kind of solution, if I go and build some kind of automation that is great for me, and then I share it with my manager, and they share it with somebody else, and suddenly something that I built with no plans to scale it architecturally, I wasn't thinking about all these other rules and constraints of across the system. I just built this thing for me or for my direct reports in this function. You need to have some kind of oversight of that to make sure that, hey, does this comply with whatever our standards, whatever rules that we need to be in our industry, in our organization, our company. But then as we're going to scale it, was it built the best way? Does it overlap? Does it duplicate something else that's out there? And maybe redirect people like, hey, you started building this, but there's already this other thing that exists that does what you're asking for, and have that conversation. I think with agents, we're going to have the same need for some kind of internal governance oversight of what that is and life cycle management of those things. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of junk in our trunk.
Yeah, and if you think about Microsoft's shipping an HR self-service agent, which is good. There are opportunities with a little thought to build a better mousetrap, if you will. Yeah. And again, look at your stakeholders. Like if you're going to build one of these, if you're in HR, you're supporting HR, ask them what the 12 most commonly asked questions that they find themselves having to address and what those answers are and where those answers come from. Because the HR site itself might be a repository of some of those, but by being able to structure that and by asking the people who respond to those questions, where do you go to look up information? Because you may be able to create a much better experience by not just taking what's apparent to you as an outsider, but by wiring in, well, there's a great publicly available library of mental health resources over here. And these are the legal regulations that employees need to be aware of in this state. And internal repositories, public videos and lectures, the more you're thoughtful about what that pool of information to draw upon and what the guided experience should be, you're going to do something that leads to more people getting the answer they need from the agent instead of trying it and saying, well, that just didn't work for me.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that. Well, and even my mind just went to what you mentioned earlier is, the ability to, by leveraging multiple agents in this model, and this agent is looking at that site and these resources. I mean, to have like a final step where an agent that goes and looks at the compliance standards, looks at kind of the other rules, and so then don't stop you from doing the rest of this, but like a last automation step would be for this compliance agent to review and say, hey, is this result even compliant with these different pieces? I mean, there'll be ways for you. You don't have to go and build a complex software tool to do multiple things. You can have dedicated, focused, agents that are experts in that specific thing, and then they can work in conjunction with each other.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating because one thing I've written about extensively in kind of my predictions for this year in AI is something I call Omni AI. Because if you think about the current state of LLMs and AI chatbots, it's not a surprise that over the past 24 months, just about every major software vendor, has added something, and they hammer you with marketing that says, you can now use AI against your Salesforce content or against your SAP content or ServiceNow and so on and so forth. And you've got it in Google, you've got it in Microsoft, you've got it with Anthropic, you've got it in Adobe, just keep going. Let's suppose you're getting ready for a meeting and you're trying to construct a view of what's going on at this company across the board. Today, in the state of the industry, you'll get a good set of information from a Microsoft repository. But you may also need to jump over to ServiceNow or to SAP or to Salesforce and keep going. And being able to, having to go and do all that extra research is a task. And in the end, what people want the right thing, and they want it as quickly as possible. So whether it is with getting all of those information sources that may be siloed, connected on the back end, and or being able to get better integration at the chat layer to be able to say, I would like to go to talk to my customer in Texas about the issues that they're having. An agent being able to kind of weave together a scheduling agent and a travel agent and a research agent to come up with a whole proposal. Like, you should fly to Texas next Tuesday at 1 p.m. These are your flight choices. These are where you should stay. These are good meeting locations. And these are the topics that they're likely to raise. And these are things that you should bring up with them. The more you bring that together, that's where you start to see real value. Like some of the initial parlor tricks of AI, like summarize the meeting that I'm in right now. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
But being able to really make that scale at cloud intensity, that on the AI approach, I think is going to be one that really wins and will reward the organizations that take that more holistic approach.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, if you go back to, can't remember, 2016 or 2017, when at the Build conference, they did the mock meeting room on stage for the keynote and did kind of like the future of meetings. It's really where you started to see like where the future of, then calling it Cortana before Copilot branding was out there. But it would be like, all right, we've got this meeting coming up at 1 p.m.
Right.
Here's everything that you were responsible for the last meeting in prep for. Here's what you need to read. Here's what's going to be discussed, kind of all those things. And it's prompting you, reminding you of those things. Once you're in the meeting, there's some people that are virtual. It is recognizing those different people. You're capturing notes. It's capturing other things. It's other reminders. You can actually have it prompt that, hey, there's 20 minutes left. It was important. You've not even like the scheduling or the agenda, you've not gotten to these 2 important topics that need to be discussed. It can prompt you on, hey, need to move on to this next thing. Let's table this. Let's move on to the next thing. And then afterwards, here are the decisions that were made. Here's what you need to go and do. I mean, I love about that too is, we all take notes. We've also all worked in organizations where we have like a manager or leader that's like, hey, notebooks down. I don't want any electronics. I want you focused on the discussion. If it's being captured, you've got Copilot capturing all of that. And then afterwards, but even if you're taking notes, like our minds get stuck on certain things and we completely miss that there was a side conversation. Oh, I was also asked to do that. I would have completely missed that had not the AI captured that, and then created tasks, scheduled meetings potentially, like all of that. Yeah, I mean, it's exciting where we're going around that degree of.
But we're not there yet. And let me just share an example. Like if you know, I host or co-host 2 podcasts. I co-host the Intro Zone, which is a Microsoft podcast with Mark Cashman, and I host the Polaris podcast for Synergy. We record on a platform called Riverside. Riverside is AI enabled, and that's really in the transcription and in the editing. But it doesn't have a separate live what's going on interface. For those of you who are used to using Copilot in the Teams meeting, you know what I mean. I was explaining this to some Riverside users 2 weeks ago that I will simultaneously, when I'm recording on Riverside, have a Teams meeting running separately so I can connect to it using my phone. So I have different mics going so that I'm running live transcription. And in that meeting, then I can have a different window and be able to ask follow-up, suggest a follow-up question here. Yeah. That use of AI is great. And I'm kind of cobbling it together by running 2 different meetings that are connected by audio, having the audio that's coming through my speakers get picked up by a different mic, but it's clunky. And, the imperative there over time is getting that kind of producer interaction based into a podcasting platform and or building better content authoring capabilities into something like Copilot. And so as customers of all of this, you are well within your rights to keep not just pushing the limits of what you can do, but what you should expect from your vendors, Microsoft and the rest.
Yeah. Well, this has been, I mean, this is great. This is good stuff. I do also want to talk about SharePoint Premium though. Kind of moving over into this world with so much, I mean, that's a big piece of SharePoint Premium. But here was what was going to be my first question. You'll appreciate this, Chris. Chris, what is the one thing that people need to know about SharePoint Premium? For those that don't know, like I used to do that series with that company about around the time when we met, and I had a video series where I'd ask these, and it might be a 1-minute video, it might be a 10-minute video, and asking people a question. At the time, it was around the launch of SharePoint 2010, and so yeah, there are hundreds of videos that are out there. I think I did like 250 to 300 over my time there. But that, again, back to
So-
you. What's the one thing people need to know? What's your elevator pitch for SharePoint Premium?
SharePoint Premium is not a single product. SharePoint Premium, based on work that Microsoft did as Cortex or as Microsoft Syntex, if you're familiar with those brand names, is an interconnected set of AI-enhanced capabilities to enrich and empower better experiences with your content. You can tell that I worked in
The marketing, yes.
But
yes.
let's break that down. Fundamentally, AI has been with us for a while, and the ability of developers to construct really sophisticated AI has been with us for a bit. And the ability to have this sort of casual chatbot interface on top of AI has become much more common. When you're looking, though, at those, like the special intellectual property for your organization, those key documents and pieces of content, how do we make them richer and more useful? That's really where the SharePoint Premium capabilities come in. And you can look at it from some different angles. There's kind of the core platform services, and I'll keep them under the SharePoint Premium banner for things like M365 backup, M365 archive. That's making sure that you've got some core stability and availability going on there. SharePoint Embedded allows developers to make sure that their experiences are still on that same manageable platform. But let's put that aside, because those are more admin and developer capabilities. Mm-hmm. At the heart of it are the ability to be able to run workflows to either build new content or get better information out of the content you already have. And we could look at things like OCR, e-signature, or translation. There's some custom modeling you can use to read documents and pull out with precision the right pieces of information from it. But I think the soul of it is in a capability called autofill. And if you haven't looked at autofill allows you to use natural language to say, I want to add a column, and how should this column behave? And it could be generate a summary of this document. It could be find any product names mentioned in this file and add them as tags in this column. It could be if this trade order is over $10,000 and there is no name entered in approval, add a field here called alert. And then just being able to do that at scale using language, the way you would ask an intern to do something, is a really powerful way to bring that final mile of fairly sophisticated AI to do document value extraction and be able to put things into practice. Because then there's a whole other range of no-code solutions, whether you're looking at Power Platform or just basic alerting. Like if you ever see a document that has a warning label that's been generated for it, who should you tell? What should happen? All of that gets unblocked with something like autofill. There are much more sophisticated capabilities across the board, but autofill is there. It's available now. It is a pay-as-you-go service, as most of the Syntex SharePoint Premium services are. And Microsoft has just dropped the pricing on it 90 cents. So it is a 1/5 of a cent per page that you process with these capabilities, which is not just making the technology easier to use, but the pricing more affordable. And the reason why we built it that way is also it puts the pressure on Microsoft. If Microsoft builds things that people use and have value, then Microsoft makes money. And if Microsoft is shipping things that don't connect, that you're not using, well, you don't have to pay for things that you don't use. So it implicitly builds in a reward to Microsoft for doing things that help out of the gate.
So keeping your Microsoft marketing hat on for a minute here.
Sure.
I know, because it's like, as you've just kind of illustrated, to go in, it's easy to go and talk about when there's a brand that's created, SharePoint Premium, where it's an aggregate of these different products from different places across the board into this category. We saw the same thing with Viva is that way. You have that in compliance as well. over with those solutions. I mean, that's Microsoft does that. Even Azure became a placeholder, and they shoved a bunch of different things across the spectrum there. When you think, though, about this category of solutions that's under SharePoint Premium, is there are there primary content collaboration management challenges that are like the driving scenarios, this is our core purpose in creating SharePoint Premium?
I think it really, for us, came from scale. So if you look at the numbers were already on the rise, and then a pandemic accelerated the pace of movement to cloud, what Satya Nadella likes to talk about, cloud intensity. There are close to 3 billion net new documents generated a day across M365. That's not looking at versions. That's not looking at the 50 to 25 billion emails. And, some days, wherever you are, it may seem like you're trying to deal with exactly that many new documents. No one has 3 billion documents personally a day, but those volumes and scales are daunting. And when you look at the structure of a modern organization that may have different divisions, different stakeholders, different global areas, trying to use manual or casual means to keep on top of that information is virtually impossible. The understanding that anytime we receive for instance, an email, a new client sign-up form, what should happen? On paper, back in the day, that would come into an office, people would look at it, look around, put it in a pneumatic tube off to some department. And in kind of the first waves of things, when things were being just transacted through email, we'll have a distribution list, and everyone will see the form comes in, and everyone will just do the right things. You're at a volume level where that, even with digital technology, that even that doesn't scale. So asking someone to look at this piece of information and make decisions about what in that piece of information, what do I need to know? Who's the client? What's the dollar value? What's the region? Being able to look all those things up and be able, because what has to happen is going to look very different based on what's in that single piece of content. Yeah. And you don't have time to read it all. You don't even have time to search for it all to see if something has changed. So what's really there, kind of at that core belief for why do we want to bring all these pieces together, it's to manage scale. How do we make sure that we keep our information together? If you also think about the natural tendency in organizations is think about how a contract works. You may write a great contract with your customer or your client, be the industry that you're in. Other people look at it and collaborate on it, and then it's time to send it, at which point you're going to email it to someone and it moves off and they sign it and it might come back, but it's not. Or the ways that people just review documents or build different documents. The more that those things are moving outside of the trust boundary, the frontier of easily accessible information, the more you lose control over the information. You can't find it, you can't secure it, you can't control who sees the information after you send it to someone. So keeping all that stuff together is a core design philosophy. It's why you've heard it on this channel and time again, like, don't email files, email links, keep everything together in one place, because there's a multiplier effect. And that multiplier effect exponentiates when you're looking at something like Copilot. So as long as I only have to look at a small number of places, there can be a lot more information inside of it, but I can unblock that information by being able to go and look at it with precision, being able to look contextually, saying, if someone has a memo that says, this document is not about Contoso, you don't want that document to be tagged with Contoso, even though it's got the word in it. Copilot might start to reason over it. So that level of precision, being able to find information that way, what dates are relevant, being able to help minimize what's redundant, making sure information is properly secured so the right people see it and the wrong ones don't. All of that is really bringing back to how do we use the power of the cloud, the intensity of your information, and the innovation of AI to help you scale your business however it needs to be and let you have some agency, bringing that word back, but in a different context, over what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And hopefully in a way that is delightful.
This is, look, as you well know, I mean, organizations continually struggle with governance and compliance, kind of all the things around there. And we both have experiences in, past lives with working with customers that their answer, and it's the wrong answer, was to completely lock everything down to where people weren't able to go and use it. And then what do you see as a topic from the community rising up? Oh, shadow IT is on the rise. I wonder why. So restrict it, people can't get their work done and go and do that.
Yeah, I remember, in a past life, I was in the 17th century. I was a shepherd in Eastern Poland, and I told the people around me the importance of making sure that contracts were stored in encrypted format, and they had no idea what I was talking about.
Past life, I was one of those people that you spoke to, and I didn't listen. And I'm telling you now, Chris, I'm sorry. I've learned.
But you're right. I mean, what's old is new again. I mean, you mentioned at the outset, I'm on the board of directors and the treasurer for AIM, Association for Intelligent Information Management. And what's wonderful about that is there's a commonality to what matters, regardless of whether you're in the Microsoft ecosystem or one of the other collegial ecosystems that coexist inside most organizations. And so there are common patterns that exist. And some of the things that we were talking about 10 or more years ago, kind of the importance of tagging and metadata, they were important for search. They're 10 times as important in an age of AI.
It's funny. I wrote an article last month, so January, again, talking about like the influence of AI on search. One of the problems with search, I know that you got a lot of depth in the search space as well, is that, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, things that have to go right for a piece of content to be found by a user when they go for that. Permissions, access, systems on like servers working, kind of all those kinds of things. Properly tagged, properly classified, using the right keywords and tags for that. A lot of times, and one of the benefits of AI is that I don't know the right words to use what I'm looking for. I like even where search went. Like if you didn't have it properly named, classified, organized, tagged, kind of all those things, you'd never find that document again. But then there's a lot of content in SharePoint, which was properly classified, tagged, and all those things, which was still not showing up in some searches. You then added, one of the in-betweens was the social aspect of that. Well, hey, all your friends who asked this question and the people in your network or your community here, they liked this document around it. And then I realized that, man, I've got a lot of friends that are insane. What garbage that they're looking at. This is not what I want. AI, though, has a much more in-depth process. It has the ability to go in and fill those gaps and truly is like, oh, I understand what you're actually looking for. You're using all the wrong words, but I think what you mean is this, and can give you something that would have never shown up in a traditional search.
Right. What's interesting is that, there are customers who sort of misunderstand what Copilot is. And for those who say Copilot is Microsoft's version of ChatGPT, you're kind of missing the point. And if you look at the complex interaction of things that happen between the moment you type something into a chat in Copilot and it comes back, there's this really complex dance of at least 4 things that are going on that are being brokered through AI and through the Microsoft Graph. And without getting highly technical, the 4 things that are going on behind that, and you've referenced a couple of them. There's a semantic index, which understands intent and the conceptual nature of things. So that if I'm asking about oil and gas, it understands that I may also be asking a question that relates to energy. How are some of those things connected? The second part of it is the lexical index, being able to then say, so now we're looking for energy. What's the index of actual words that I care about? And those lexical terms can show up in the full text of my content or as tags, which is where tagging comes in. The rest of the places that are getting orchestrated together, one is contextualization, the signals about what's likely to be relevant to me based on my information worker proximity to other people similarly situated. So the folks in my part of the organization who are working on a similar problem will help make things more relevant to me, knowing that they're the ones who are working on it. And lastly, with security. So again, to break it down, with conceptual search, textual search, contextual search, and security search, all of that is coming together against your private content in a way that doesn't expose it to the internet, which is the magic of how Copilot works. It's what Microsoft has added in this space. And it is why the tags that you add to your content just become more and more and more important. As I said, what was old is new again.
Yeah. Well, and part of that battle was always, how much do you automate? How much do you require manual? Because if you asked, as part of your input, I want to upload this document, this report that I built into our system so everyone can go and find it. But here's this lengthy multi-page form to submit. Mm-hmm. I must have at least 20 keywords, the number of required fields. And so what would happen is people would bypass that process. I just need to get it. I just want to upload that in there. And the other way around too is if it was too complex to get content back out. I mean, both ways. That's where, again, the rise of shadow IT. You have people that ignore or subvert that process. And so then you have your intellectual property on non-compliant systems and cloud systems and local, or they're attaching things again to emails and pushing that out there, kind of all of those different things. Right. You have to find that balance, because if you don't put any guardrails up, what do people do? Attach the document, submit with nothing. So there needs to be some level of, it's automated, it's pulling things in, it's assigning them to it, it's asking for some inputs, but doing it in a way that you get that mixture of collects all of that rich metadata and everything around that. And I think some people forget that that is still critical, as you say, even more critical to the AI era, for all this content that's out there.
Right. Yeah, it's another thing that, again, what's old is new again. More than 10 years ago, I remember speaking about the tyranny of the red asterisk, and that refers to, if you're familiar with it, in classic SharePoint, in lots of places, if there's a mandatory field you need to fill out, it is highlighted with a red asterisk. And an information architect can go through and say, these are the 12 things that we really need to know about every piece of content. It could be the author, expiration date, customer name, dollar value, so on and so forth. The balance of governance and adoption exists in a balance, and aggressive governance doesn't lead to runaway usage. It leads to users running away and no adoption. If I have to fill out the equivalent of a US 1040 tax form every time I change a file, well, I'm not going to start putting stuff in that system. I'm thinking of, there was a organization I worked with years ago, and they will go nameless. They had a very simple form that they put, like, is this a business critical document? That was the one mandatory field they had. The answers were yes and no. And what they were trying to do with it led to the fact that nobody ever picked that field. Because if you said no, document went into a SharePoint library, you could search it, find it, get back to it, great. If you said yes, it moved it to a different repository you had no access to. So what the organization learned is never pick that unless you never want to see your family again, quote unquote. Yeah. And those information architecture governance concepts, really still hold sway today. People find information lots of different ways, and Copilot is adding to that arsenal of, am I going to ask someone? Am I going to browse? Am I going to search? Am I going to use Copilot to surface it? All of those things demand and work best with a properly structured information repository. And to bring it back, the more I can automate that at scale, the more can make sure that I'm applying the right sensitivity, the right retention, the right tags to my content so that people don't have to. It's perfectly fine to attach 6 pieces of metadata to every piece of content, so long as you're not counting on someone to read the document and retype stuff they already typed, because they just won't do it.
Yeah. Looking back at, and I don't know how much you can share if you know this just off the top of your head, but for companies that are longtime, SharePoint organizations, is there like a list of like the top reasons, like the 1 through 5 of like the key reasons why they upgrade and they move over there? Or are there features, are there aspects of SharePoint Premium that stand out to reasoning why people buy stuff? Like I just had this conversation with a prospect client this morning on a call, and I asked like around their product. So it's an ISV, and I said, they said, well, we want to understand, what we need to do to get in this space. I said, all right, what are the main reasons why in a competitive situation, why they don't buy your product? It's like, oh, we're not really running into that. I said, well, either you're not being honest about why people are saying no to your product in a competitive situation, or you do not know because you're not tracking it, and that's a big mistake. Likewise, I know Microsoft does. When people buy or don't buy, Microsoft can tell you these are the reasons why they say they're buying it. Here's where we lost on these deals.
You didn't tell me how many you're going to ask for, so quickly I can give you 4. I may have come up with a 5th by the end of this diatribe. I already talked about scales. That's number 1. I'm not going to revisit that one. The second is compliance. And if you think about the dark matter problem, the 2 most common file types in M365 today are not Office types. They're PDFs and they're images. And there's a lot of information that's trapped inside of those, especially if something hasn't had OCR applied to it. So that's an example of the second reason why people look at it. It has to do with compliance, being able to get better information to be extracted so we know what's subject to e-discovery, what needs different security, and all the rest. The third is just interactive search and discovery. It's relating to scale, but being able to help people get back to the information as a productivity boon for them. The fourth is to empower AI. And there will be a 5th, which I will share at a future date after I've invented it.
Well, I mean, that's a lot. I mean, again, like I understand it. I like the scale, especially with what organizations try to do. But again, this is a failure of information systems is when information goes in, but you don't have the ability to get it back out. And that was a lot of complaints. We both experienced this, especially back in the SharePoint on-prem days, where it wasn't architected right, it wasn't maintained, and then data was just going in. It became a black hole. And even me, like the owner of a document, I could put something in there and then go to search and could not for the life of me find it again, except that I remember the breadcrumbs of where it lived in that project. And we have to, an organization that can access its own data is going to have a distinct competitive advantage over those that are lost.
I thought of the 5th, and I actually had it in my head before, but
new invention, people, brand new invention happening right here. Okay,
it's got to do with workflow and automation, because anytime I automate something, it really requires more precision than I might get from something that's textual. So if I need to if I see an order come in, I need to trigger something to happen in a manufacturing system and to alert shippers. That may not, I can build automation only if I know with precision the part numbers or SKUs or dollar values that are coming in on these pieces of content. So you can't even consider doing those things until you've got more structure in the document. So workflow is the 5th. I'd also note places where it doesn't work have to do with sort of frictionless collaboration. And the example I like to bring up is in the university context. It's tempting sometimes for universities to, if they're on M365, setting up all these repositories and to set up rules that say, hey, if students are working on a project, we should prompt them to enter like the professor name and the course number on every piece of content they upload. Pick your battles. That's just, if you do that, it's seen as a tax, and that content will just stay locally. It's just easier to give people who aren't working in a regulated environment, who aren't working in structured processes. Don't impose structure on a process that never is going to need that as an end result. Again, start with the target results and work backwards to how to get there.
That's why my stance on the concept of sprawl is that as painful as it can be, and I realize there's some organizations where it's just everybody's a hoarder of information that's out there, but having sprawl, I see it as a positive. It means people are collaborating, they're using the system. You need to get better at it. You need to find opportunities to automate and clean all of that up. But there will always be, some degree of sprawl, and that's a good thing. I would rather see activity than see, because you can see the analytics, you can see the data. Why is this organization, this team, this business unit, why are their numbers dropping off on using the platform? And a lot of it goes from key functionality is missing. IT has not been responsive. We've built our own solution outside of all of this so that we can get our work done. Having conversations around that. You need to automate where it makes sense to automate, make it as frictionless as possible for people to collaborate and use the system.
Yeah, sprawl is a great concept because if you think about it, you can't it's much harder to manage or get value from things that you can't see. As long as you have everything in one growing container, there's hope that you can do that. If some of that is spilling into Gmail and other file systems and other collaboration venues, you just don't see it anymore. And so you've got 70% of what you used to have, and it may seem easier to manage, but sometimes think about velocity. A document that never moves is probably less valuable than a document in motion. And the content that people are interacting with the most and moving around and sending links and collaborating on, that's hot. That's in the top 20%. You got to keep that at your core.
Yeah.
If a project summary from 15 years ago in a line of business that I'm never going to do again, well, if that PDF, if someone emails it to someone else and accidentally gets deleted, there may not be a loss to the organization, not a significant one, as opposed to all the work that we're doing to plan our sales kickoff for April 10th. That information, people have to be able to put their hands on. So,
yeah.
Speaking of sprawl, we've definitely been doing a fair bit of verbal sprawl on this episode of CollabTalk.
No, but just to close out too, I just want to note that documents in motion. It's what the kids are talking about. I think they call it document in motion is fire, Chris.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Indeed.
I'm one of the hippest people. I am one of the hippest people out there in my own mind.
Dude, you were so brat. The fire is just amazing.
So people are always saying, my wife is always telling me I'm a brat, but yeah.
A brat means something different. You should look it up.
Whatever. I've heard it both ways. But Chris, hey, I really appreciate taking the time. I know there's a lot we're going to go through. You've got your podcast or something or other. I think people listen to it occasionally. I'll have links, of course, out in the blog post to that.
I'd say one of the best places people can stay in touch with me, apart from LinkedIn or Twitter, is if you just look up chrismcnulty.net, it will get you to the professional and personal sides of my life with security and governance. Let's be fair.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, great. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the CollabTalk podcast. New episodes are published weekly, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and most other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.